Two men, same age, 31, same city, same $80,000 salary, same $90,000 sitting in a savings account. On the same weekend, they make one different decision. Jake buys a house, Marcus keeps renting and invests his 90 grand instead. 30 years later, one of them owns a home worth over $1 million, paid off, free and clear. The other has an investment portfolio worth more, $1.4 million, and everyone who called him crazy for throwing money away on rent goes quiet. So the renter won, case closed, right? Except here's what nobody tells you. That $1.4 million portfolio has a problem so quiet, so buried in the fine print of real life, that almost every rent versus buy video on the internet completely misses it. And when you see it, the obvious winner stops being obvious. He didn't get a better job. He didn't pick a hot stock. He didn't time the market. The gap between these two men comes down to a single number and a single habit. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which side of it you're on. Here's the problem with every rent versus buy debate you have ever watched. Neither side runs the full math. The buying crowd shows you the paid-off house and hides the $200,000 that quietly leaked out along the way. The renting crowd shows you the portfolio and forgets that the renter still has to pay rent every month forever until the day he dies. This video includes everything: the down payment, the closing costs, the mortgage interest, the property taxes that climb every single year, the maintenance nobody budgets for, the opportunity cost of the money you lock in the walls, and on the other side, the real return of the market, the rent that never stops rising, and the one behavioral fact that decides this entire thing. By the end, you'll know the exact year the math flips, the single number that tells you whether your city is a buy city or a rent city, and the honest answer to which of these two men actually ends up free. Read the numbers with me, because they don't lie, but the way people tell this story usually does. Let's build both lives from the ground up, dollar for dollar. Jake buys a $400,000 home. He puts 20% down. That's $80,000. Add $10,000 in closing costs, lender fees, title insurance, inspection, the stuff that never makes the highlight reel. So Jake's day one cost is $90,000, gone. His mortgage is $320,000, a 30-year fixed at 6.5%. That's a payment of $2,023 a month in principal and interest. But that's not his real cost. Add property tax, about $1,100 a year per 100,000 of value, so roughly $367 a month. Add homeowner's insurance, another $150. Add a maintenance budget, 1% of the home's value a year, which every honest homeowner knows is the floor, another $333 a month. Jake's true cost to own, all in, right around $2,900 a month. Now Marcus. Marcus rents the same kind of place for $2,000 a month, and that $90,000 Jake buried in a down payment and closing costs. Marcus invests every penny of it into a low-cost total market index fund. Then, and this is the part that makes it a fair fight, every single month that Jake's housing costs more than Marcus's rent, Marcus invests the difference too. Same salary, same starting money, same total dollars leaving their pockets each month. One choice different. Let's run the clock. Now here's the thing, almost nobody says out loud. The moment Jake signs those closing papers, he is not ahead, he is behind, and not by a little. Look at his very first mortgage payment. $2,023 leaves his account. Of that, $1,733 goes straight to the bank as interest. Only $290 actually pays down his loan. In month one, 86% of Jake's building equity payment builds equity for the bank, not for Jake. Meanwhile, Marcus already has $90,000 working for him in the market from day one, compounding while Jake's money sits frozen in drywall and closing fees. So if you measured these two men at the end of year one, it isn't close. Marcus is winning by a mile. And this is exactly where the renting crowd stops the video. Right at the moment, renting looks unbeatable. But we're not stopping here, because a mortgage does something sneaky over time, and rent does something even sneakier. Stick with the numbers, because this is where the story starts to turn. Year 3. Jake's home has appreciated modestly. Call it 3.5% a year, the long-run average, not the pandemic fantasy. If he sold today after a 6% real estate commission, he'd walk away with about $109,000 in equity. Marcus's portfolio? $145,000. Marcus is ahead by $36,000. Renting so far is very clearly not throwing money away. Year 5. Jake's net worth if he sold, $148,000. Marcus, $187,000. The gap has grown to $39,000. Notice something though. Jake's mortgage payment hasn't moved. It's still $2,023, exactly what it was on day one. But Marcus's rent has been climbing 3% every year. It started at $2,000. It's now $2,250. That's the first crack in the renter's armor, and it's a crack that only gets wider. Here's a number to sit with. Rent is the most you will pay that month. A mortgage payment is the least you will pay that month. One goes up forever, the other one ends. Year 10. Jake, net of selling costs, $262,000. Marcus, $313,000. Marcus is still ahead by about $51,000. If you're on team rent, you're feeling great right now. And honestly, on this math, with a disciplined investor, you should. But now I have to explain the one force that's been working silently in Jake's favor this whole time. Leverage. When Jake put $80,000 down on a $400,000 house, he didn't get the returns on his $80,000. He got the returns on the entire $400,000. When that house appreciates 3.5%, it doesn't grow by 3.5% of his down payment. It grows by 3.5% of the whole thing, about $14,000 in a single year, on an $80,000 bet. That's the quiet magic and the quiet danger of a mortgage. The bank let Jake control an asset 5 times bigger than his money. And remember the rule of 72. Divide 72 by your growth rate to see how long it takes to double. Marcus's portfolio at 7% doubles roughly every 10 years. Jake's home at 3.5% doubles about every 20. On the surface, Marcus should be pulling away fast. But Jake is doubling a much bigger base on borrowed money, while slowly turning his rent-size payment into pure ownership. Watch what those two forces do over a longer runway, because that 80,000 to 400,000 ratio is about to matter more than anything else in this video. Before we hit the year 20 and year 30 numbers, the ones that surprise people on both sides, we have to talk about the costs that almost never make it into these videos, because they hit both men, and they don't hit them equally. Hidden costs. Round 1, the ones that hit Jake, start with the exit. When Jake eventually sells, he pays a real estate commission of 5 to 6%. On $1 million house, that's $60,000, evaporated in a single afternoon at the closing table. That's why every number I'm showing you for Jake is already after selling costs. It's the honest version, not the brochure version. His property taxes aren't fixed either. They ride up with the value of the home every single year. That $367 a month becomes $400, then $500, then more. A bill that grows whether Jake's income grows or not. Then there's insurance, which has been climbing faster than inflation in half the country. And maintenance, the big one people pretend doesn't exist. Homeowners budget zero and reality bills them thousands. A roof is $9,000. An HVAC system, $7,500. A water heater dies on a Tuesday for $1,200. A foundation crack, $4,000. It doesn't come every year, but it comes, and it always comes with a due date you didn't get to choose. Over 30 years, that 1% a year maintenance floor quietly adds up to more than the price of a car. Ask Jake about year 7. He walks in on a Sunday evening, looks up, and there's a brown stain the size of a dinner plate spreading across the living room ceiling. 2 days later, he's standing in the driveway holding a $9,000 roofing estimate. In the exact same month, his property tax bill went up again. That's the part of ownership the brochures skip. When something breaks at Marcus's apartment, he sends a text, and the landlord pays. When something breaks at Jake's house, Jake is the landlord. There's no one to call. He's the emergency fund of last resort for his own roof, and that roof does not care what else he had planned for the money. Hidden costs, round 2. The one even homeowners forget. Opportunity cost. That $90,000 Jake put down and spent on closing. If he had invested it instead, at 7% in 30 years, it alone would have grown to nearly $700,000. $700,000. That's the invisible price tag stapled to the down payment. And it's the single biggest number nobody ever says out loud, because you never grieve the money you didn't make. But it's real, and Marcus is quietly collecting it the entire time. Every dollar Jake locked in the walls is a dollar that stopped compounding. So let's tally the leaks on the buying side. 90,000 frozen up front, 60,000 out the door on the way out, taxes and insurance climbing forever, and a maintenance bill that never sends a warning. Put it all together and buying looks like a slow, expensive trap. So at this point, you might think it's settled. The renter invests more, avoids the leaks, dodges the $60,000 exit fee. Let's watch it play out to the end. Year 15, halfway home. Jake, net if he sold today, $403,000. Marcus, $477,000. The disciplined renter is still ahead by about $74,000. But look at what's happening underneath the totals, because this is the turn. Jake's principal and interest payment is still $2,023, exactly what it was on the day he signed 15 years ago. Marcus's rent just crossed $3,000 a month, and it is still climbing 3% a year, every year, on autopilot. 15 years ago, Jake's housing cost 45% more than Marcus's rent. Today they're almost even. In a few more years, the renter will be paying more every single month than the owner. And every dollar of that gap is a dollar Marcus can no longer invest. The treadmill is speeding up, and it only speeds up in one direction. Year 20. Jake, net if sold, $578,000. Marcus, $695,000. The disciplined renter is ahead by $117,000. But look closer at the trajectory. Jake's mortgage is 2/3 paid off. His housing cost is basically frozen, while Marcus's rent has climbed past $3,500 a month. The gap between them stopped growing as a percentage. Marcus is winning, but he's winning slower. Year 30. The mortgage is gone. Jake owns his home outright, $1.14 million, free and clear. His housing payment just dropped to essentially zero. Marcus's portfolio, $1.4 million. On paper, the disciplined renter wins by roughly $300,000. And if we stopped right here, like almost every video does, the headline would be renting beats buying, invest the difference, done. But we just hit the two facts that flip this entire story upside down. Keep watching, because this is the part that changes everything. Here's the first crack, and it's the big one. Everything I just showed you for Marcus depends on one assumption, that he actually invested the difference every single month for 30 years, including the months the market dropped 30% and his gut screamed at him to stop, including the year he wanted a new car, including the promotion that came with a nicer apartment instead of a bigger brokerage deposit. So let's ask the honest question, what does the real Marcus do? Because the data on this is brutal. Most renters who plan to invest the difference invest a fraction of it. Let's be generous and say he invests 30%, better than most people manage. Watch what happens. At year 5, the real Marcus has $145,000, and Jake has already passed him. By year 10, Jake's at $296,000, Marcus at $220,000. By year 20, Jake leads by $164,000. And at year 30, Jake's paid-off home is worth $1.14 million. The realistic renter's portfolio, $932,000. Jake wins by more than $200,000. Nothing changed except one thing, discipline. And this is the quiet genius of a mortgage that nobody puts on a motivational poster. A mortgage is a forced savings account with a roof on top. Every month, whether he feels like it or not, Jake is forced to convert $2,000 of spending into $2,000 of ownership. Marcus has to choose to do that. Jake's bank does it for him at gunpoint. There's a mistake hiding in the renter's freedom. The freedom to invest the difference is also the freedom to not. And loss aversion, the fact that a 30% crash feels twice as painful as a 30% gain feels good, means the exact moment Marcus should be buying, his brain is begging him to sell. The renter didn't lose to the homeowner, he lost to himself. And here's what makes it worse for the disciplined renter's case. The spreadsheet I showed you was actually generous to Marcus. It left out three things that quietly tilt the field toward Jake. 1. The inflation hedge. Jake's mortgage payment is frozen at $2,023 for 30 years. But thanks to inflation, that payment gets cheaper every year in real terms. In year 1, it's a serious chunk of his paycheck. By year 20, after 2 decades of raises and rising prices, that same $2,000 feels like pocket change. Marcus's rent does the exact opposite. It chases inflation upward forever. Jake borrowed in today's dollars and pays back in tomorrow's cheaper ones. The bank handed him a hedge and didn't even mention it. 2. The tax code. When Jake sells his primary home, the first $250,000 of gain is completely tax-free, $500,000 if he's married. When Marcus sells his portfolio to actually use the money, he owes capital gains tax on every dollar it grew. So that $1.4 million isn't really $1.4 million in his pocket. Uncle Sam is a silent partner in the renter's account and not in the owner's home. 3. The house is an asset Jake can borrow against, live in, or hand to his kids. It's not just a number on a screen. It's a roof, a hedge, and an inheritance rolled into one. Stack those three on top of the forced savings effect, and the renter obviously wins story gets very, very shaky. One more thing the simple version ignores. Interest rates don't stand still. Jake locked in at 6.5%, but if rates fall to 4%, he can refinance and cut his payment by hundreds a month, then keep that lower payment while the house keeps appreciating. The renter has no equivalent move. There is no refinance your rent button. Rent only ever renegotiates upward, and it cuts the other way too. If Jake had bought when rates were sky high, that same leverage that built his wealth would have bled it, with a bigger slice of every payment feeding the bank instead of his equity. So the honest answer isn't just about you, it's about the rate environment you're standing in. In a low-rate world, buying is cheap borrowed money and the math tilts hard toward owning. In a high-rate world, that identical house costs a fortune to finance, and renting and investing gets a real edge. The price tag matters less than the rate stapled to it. Now let's be equally honest about the other side, because I'm not here to sell you a house. Buying has two nightmares of its own, and both are brutal. The first is timing. Meet Ryan. Same $400,000 house as Jake, but Ryan bought at the top, right before prices slid 12%. 3 years in, his home was worth less than he paid, his equity was underwater, and he still owed the bank nearly the whole loan. If life forced him to sell, he'd bring a check to the closing table just to walk away. Marcus, renting through that same crash, lost nothing he couldn't ride out, and kept buying index shares while they were on sale. The second nightmare is the forced move. The entire ownership math assumes Jake stays put for decades. But what if year 3 brings a job across the country? A divorce, a new baby, a parent who gets sick. Now Jake sells early, paying the 6% commission, eating closing costs a second time, capturing almost none of the appreciation. A house is a magnificent 30-year asset and a miserable 3-year one. The shorter your horizon, the more quietly renting wins, not because the math changed, but because your life did. Go back to the disciplined Marcus, the one who really did invest every month and ended with $1.4 million. He beat Jake's net worth. But here's the second fact that flips the story. That portfolio has a job it can never quit. It has to pay rent forever. At year 30, Marcus's rent has climbed to about $56,000 a year. Use the 4% rule, the safe withdrawal number from the Trinity study, and his $1.4 million throws off about $56,000 a year. Read that again. His entire life savings, the whole portfolio, generates just barely enough to keep a roof over his head. Every dollar that fund earns walks straight out the door to a landlord. Jake owns his home outright. His housing cost is property tax, insurance, and maintenance, about $2,300 a month, and no rent ever. He lives essentially for free, sitting on $1 million asset he can borrow against, sell, or leave to his kids. So who actually won? The renter has a bigger number, the owner has a smaller number, and a life with no rent in it. That is not the same thing, and anyone who tells you it is has never run this all the way to the end. And to be just as honest, renting has leaks Team Rent never mentions. Every lease renewal is a negotiation you usually lose. The rent goes up and you have no control over it. In some cities, you hand a broker a full month's rent just to sign, and you do it again every time you move. And renters move. Each move is a deposit tied up, movers to pay, days off work, a new deposit due before the old one comes back. Do that 4 times in a decade, and you've quietly spent thousands for the privilege of not owning. Then there's the deepest cost of all, the one with no line item. At the end of 30 years, the renter owns nothing. No asset, no paid-off home, just a rent bill taller than he's ever had. The owner's leaks at least buy him a house. The renter's leaks buy him time under someone else's roof. And that trade only pays off if he truly converted his flexibility into invested dollars. If he didn't, he ends up with the worst of both worlds. No house and no portfolio either. Before the verdict, let's kill the 3 myths that poison this whole debate. Myth 1, renting is throwing money away. You've seen it's false, but so is the flip side. Every dollar Jake spends on mortgage interest, taxes, maintenance, and that selling commission is also thrown away. It just doesn't feel like it because the house is standing right there. Interest is money thrown away with extra steps. Myth 2, your home is your best investment. It usually isn't. Homes appreciate at roughly the rate of inflation, 3 to 4% a year over the long run. The stock market has historically done 7 to 10. The only reason a house keeps up at all is leverage and forced savings, not because bricks are magic. If your house is your best investment, it mostly means you never invested anywhere else. Myth 3, you build equity from day one. You watched it happen. Month 1, 86% of the payment went to the bank, and after costs, Jake was underwater for years. Equity comes slowly, then suddenly in the back half of the loan. Believe these 3, and you'll make a 6-figure decision with your feelings, which is exactly what the industry is counting on. Here's the honest verdict, and it comes down to one number you can calculate in 10 seconds, the price-to-rent ratio. Take the price of the home and divide it by a full year of rent for the same kind of place. In our example, 400,000 divided by 24,000, that's about 17. Under 15, buying almost always wins. Over 21, renting and investing usually wins. In between, it's a coin flip that your behavior decides. Our 17 leans toward buying, but only if you'll stay long enough. Let me make that concrete with 3 kinds of cities. Picture a Midwest town, a $200,000 house that rents for $1,600 a month. Price to rent of about 10. Buying isn't just better there, it's a landslide. Rent is almost pure cost, and homes are cheap relative to it. Now picture a coastal tech city, a $1.2 million condo that rents for $4,000 a month. Price to rent of 25. There, buying is often a trap. You'd be pouring a fortune into a down payment while an identical unit rents for a fraction of the ownership cost. And that's the market where renting and investing genuinely wins. And then there's the messy middle, a Sunbelt city where a $350,000 house rents for about $1,800 a month. Price to rent of around 16. Almost exactly our example. Here the spreadsheet just shrugs. Buy and you'll come out a little ahead if you stay put, and you'd never invest on your own. Rent and invest, and you'll come out a little ahead if you're disciplined and mobile. When the math is basically a tie, the tiebreaker isn't the city, it's your temperament, not your zip code. Most of America lives in that middle, and that's the whole point. For most people, the address doesn't decide this, you do. So here's the clean rule. Buying wins if you'll stay put 7 years or more, if you value stability and roots, and be honest with yourself, if you are not the kind of person who will actually invest the difference every month without fail. Renting and investing wins if you're genuinely mechanically disciplined, if you value mobility over permanence, and if you live in a city where prices have run so far ahead of rents that owning is just renting money from a bank instead of renting a home from a landlord. There is no universal answer. There's only your number and your behavior. And here's the part no spreadsheet will ever capture. Ask Jake what owning feels like, and he'll talk about painting his daughter's room any color she wants, about neighbors he's known for a decade, about the quiet peace of knowing no landlord can ever tell him to leave. Ask Marcus, and he'll talk about the year he took a job in a new city on 2 weeks' notice, about never once calling a plumber at midnight, about a life he can fold up and carry anywhere. Neither of them is wrong. One bought roots, the other bought wings. Money is only one scoreboard. and it isn't always the one that matters most. The real mistake is choosing the life you don't actually want just to win a math argument. So when you run your own numbers, don't only ask which choice makes you richer, ask which one you'll still be glad you made 10 years from now, because you're not just buying an asset or signing a lease. You're buying the shape of your daily life. So let's go back to our two men. Same age, same salary, same $90,000. One bought, one rented. And after all of it, the interest, the taxes, the maintenance, the rent inflation, the market, the discipline, here's the truth this whole video was built to reveal. You do not rent your way to wealth. You do not buy your way to wealth. You invest your way there. The house never made anyone rich. What the house does is decide whether you're forced to save or free to fail. For most people, for the 90% who won't invest the difference with iron discipline, through every crash, the forced version wins. Not because owning is magic, because you are human. The renter with $1.4 million looked like the winner for 29 minutes of his life. The homeowner, living rent-free at 70, looked like the winner for the last 30 years of his. The number on the screen and the freedom in your life are two different scoreboards. So here's what to actually do tonight. In 10 minutes, open a browser, find the price of a home you'd genuinely buy, and the monthly rent for the same kind of place. Divide the price by 12 months of that rent. If your number is under 15 and you'll stay a while, lean buy. If it's over 21, or you move every couple of years, lean rent and set up an automatic investment for the difference before you talk yourself out of it. That single transfer is the whole ballgame. It's the difference between the Marcus who ended with 1.4 million and the Marcus who ended with 900,000. And the next time someone hands you a hot take, renting is throwing money away, or buying is a scam, just invest the difference. Ask them the only two questions that actually decide it. How long are you really going to stay? And be honest, are you actually going to invest the difference every month, even when it hurts? Because everything else, the equity, the portfolio, the year 30 number, all of it flows from those two answers, not from what you plan to do, from what you actually do. That's the only version of this math that matters. Rent or buy, the wealth was never in the walls, it was in the habit. Do the math for your city, run your own price to rent number, and then make the boring, honest choice, the one that holds up in a spreadsheet, not the one that sounds good at a dinner party. If this gave you the full picture instead of half of it, the version with the rent inflation and the maintenance and the behavior all in one place, subscribe to the GOAT formula and turn on the bell. We run the real math on the money decisions that quietly shape your whole life. No hype, no agenda, just the number that holds up. I'll see you in the next one.